Welcome to Charts This Week. My name's David Linton, and this week's edition comes to you from London on Monday the 8th of February. And we start as always by looking at crude, and we are seeing a sustained recovery. We said the seasonality this time of year, we'll look at that in a minute, was good. We're seeing the correlation rising with the dollar. Dollar did have a bit of a weak week last week, so we'll have a look at that as well. But this is increasingly looking like a bottom, and crude is probably coming off its lows for the year. Of course, we've been bearish for a very long time on crude, and it's still bearish in the medium term while we're below the cloud. We need to get all the way back above the mid-40s for crude to turn bullish. So that's still quite a long way for crude to go, given it's gone up several dollars from the low, another $10 or so more, quite a lot to ask for, but there's got all that room to recover within the bear trend. And here we see the seasonality. So this is where we said the low point looked like occurring, and we get a strong few months in crude. It may not be long lived. Here we saw it last year. It lasted just over a few months into the year, and then we get the second sell-off. So it's not to say that this is a low for good. We may go lower later in the year, but it looks like for now we've got a little bit of a recovery underway in line with the seasonality as we would expect. If we take a look at the shorter term charts, the 60-minute charts, this data all coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. Here we see the trend, the counter trend now, where we see the bullish trend, slight sideways consolidation. We're back into bullish territory, back above the cloud. Shift T on your Updata system, hold the Shift keys and T key down. We have got a target to 35.40. We're at 34.40 at the moment, so about 3% upside there on this chart. We do still have the downside target hanging over us, but we have these new support lines coming in, giving us just some short-term support. And if we look at that was Brent, if we look at WTI, similar picture, Shift T. We do have downside targets here hanging over us, but quite good support here on these lines as well, and a little upside target only around 2% away, so not as strong. If you're trading crude in the short term, then take a look at the 1-minute charts. This is Brent again coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, and now we start to get a more granular picture. Here we've got about 3.5% upside to 35.65 on Brent. This target given back on the 3rd of February last week, 5% upside. So we do have these upside targets and some downside targets hanging over us, but the trend is up. So a fairly mixed picture. Keep an eye on our morning calls each morning where we call Brent for the day. If we take a look at Henry Hub, US NatGas, below on the weekly, below on the daily. The seasonality for NatGas slightly different, where we fall away at this time of year typically, but the big falls are left for the summer. The recovery comes a little bit later on NatGas, and we see here that we are really in this big range of around $2 to $2.50. If we look at the 60-minute chart, we see here that we did have this fall off last week. We've gone back into a new bull trend here, and of course Shift T will give you the trends and targets. We do have an upside target which is about 8% away to 229. We also have a downside target to 180, so NatGas could go either way. And again, if you're trading Henry Hub, the place to look is the 1-minute chart. Shift T on your system will give you the trends and targets. Interestingly, we're nudging resistance here. You can go down in the bottom right hand corner here, take the box size lower, and that will give you lower targets still. So we're seeing here that we are really stuck in a range. It will take a move to define where we go next. Take a look at European gas. It's up stronger this morning. TTF and NBP, most gas products up slightly this morning, just under 1%, 0.5%, 1%. But we're interestingly still very bearish. This is the 60-minute chart for NBP. This data coming either from the Updata energy feed, real-time consolidated broker data, or from your Trayport screen. Shift T, we can see we still have downside targets, 26.50, 27.25 on NBP front month. So still looking pretty worrying. And of course, if you're trading it very short term, the 1-minute chart, again, this real-time data coming from the brokers, here we see we've got 4.5, 5 3.9% downside, so a lot of downside off those selling thrusts from last week. So still looking pretty bearish there. TTF well below the cloud, and on the 60-minute chart, if we take a look at that, we see Shift T downside target of 8% downside, so a lot of downside potential still there. Take a look at your 1-minute charts and keep an eye on our morning calls each day. Here we see German gas also hitting new lows, as you would expect, in line with the other products. German power hitting new lows this morning. We're off about 1.5% at 22 euros. How low can German power go? Really just hitting the bottom all the time. Really hard to say when we hit the bottom until we see that kind of turnaround that we're seeing in crude. Interestingly, it's not happening with German power. If we look at the 60-minute chart, again, real-time OTC broker from the data, classic movement, down, sideways, down, sideways, down. 22.05 is the price at the moment. Shift T on your Updata screen, and you're not getting any targets here. Mainly, you'll have to go to the 1-minute chart. So if you're trading German power, this is the place to go. Shift T here, and we do have a downside target of 21.75. That was given at 23 last week, so that's where we're heading. Notice this target given also at the end of last week, now met. You really cannot ignore these price targets when you see them. UK power hitting new lows as well. Nordic power also hitting new lows. Take a look at the quarterly chart. This is the quarterly contract on NordPool. Shift T, downside target 15.5, so quite a lot there as well. If we go then to Forex, the dollar had a bad week last week. It really came back, and this is the big consolidation phase that we're in. So this is on the daily chart. We pulled right back just below the cloud here. So we've done that before, of course, in the last year. So it's not yet calling a decline in the dollar. We'd need to really fall through around the 93 level for this sideways consolidation pattern to be broken. And here we see the 60-minute chart on the dollar index, again coming off your Thomson Reuters icon. Shift T, downside targets here 92.30 and 91.60, so who knows, we'll see that breakdown. These two sell-offs are the first really big sell-offs we've seen in a while, and that is just now saying dollar weakness. Euro is back above on the daily chart, and we haven't done that for a while. We see here we did have temporary breaches, but it's been a good few months since we've been back above on the daily. This 115 level is clearly the sort of level to break. We're at 111.50 at the moment, so still got work to do. And then if we look at the 60-minute chart, we see here Shift T, and we've got upside targets on the euro: 118, 117.20, 114.40. That would be the near side target. So does look like there's upside potential on the euro. And of course, if you're trading currencies in the shorter term, take a look at the 1-minute chart. This is on Thomson Reuters icon. Shift T, and we do have this 115.50 target not yet activated. I can go down on my box size here in the bottom right hand corner. Shift T here. Do have a little bit of upside, but nothing terribly exciting. So euro might stall this week. Just keep an eye on those 1-minute charts and our morning call reports. If we look at the sterling chart, big recovery in sterling in the last couple of weeks, off the bottom against the dollar. Here we see the 60-minute chart. This just starting to turn a bit bearish again. We're not quite through on the cloud. We might be finding support, or we might be breaching. We're below on the price. If we go through 144.50, then we're back into bearish territory on the short term, and we've got a downside target of 141.10 if we go lower than that 144.50 level. So keep an eye on that. Euro sterling, euro stronger against sterling at the moment. Norwegian kroner 9.50, so again euro strength there. Swiss franc, we're seeing the euro strength there as well. Swiss franc against sterling is strong, so sterling is still the weaker currency there. If we take a look at the markets, and this really is the big story of the week. Last week's US stock market closing back towards the lows. So here we see the weekly chart. That's the closing candle there last week. So that's quite a bad week for the market. We see here on the daily chart, we're below the cloud, keeping us in bearish territory. Remember, on this chart, we haven't seen breaches like this for over a few years, and this signal has been highly accurate. We had one breach in 2000, that was a sell. We had a 2003 buy. We had a 2007-8 sell. We had a 2009 buy, and this is the first cloud cross since then. And those of you who read our client report last week, where week before last, where we said this move below the cloud and the fact that we've hung around here is very, very worrying for the market. So we're in a new bear trend in the long term, new bear trend in the medium term, and we did turn bullish. This was the recovery. This is where you kind of would expect to see it on the 60-minute chart, but we've just started to turn a bit bearish there as well. Downside potential here of 21%. Quite strong support here, around 10% below the price. So we may fall and find support, but we do have this downside target. On the 0.5% chart, we do also have a downside target to around the same level. If we breach this level, you can see here, this is a very strong breach, then that's downside potential. And then the 60-minute chart, downside targets of 6%, two downside targets, that's like a cluster, down to about 1770 on the S&P 500. We're at 1880 now, so another 110 points downside. That's about 6%. That is quite scary. So this chart has turned quite bearish in the short term. Remember last week we said short-term upside, long-term downside, now, or medium-term downside. Now we're saying short-term downside as well. So the picture has turned pretty bearish. And we take a look at the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ chart is still bullish on the long-term chart, above on the weekly, but that's not been nudged yet. We can take a look at that. We're just there. We see the week we had last week on that weekly close on NASDAQ, closing the lowest level we've seen. Actually, that was a rising candle. This is the lowest close we've seen since around 2014, so late 2014. So a year, nearly 18 months. This is the lowest close we've seen. So that is bearish. And if we stay here, we're in bearish territory, and we will start to come out on the cloud. So the weekly chart not looking quite as bearish as the S&P, but then we see the daily chart. Remember, the S&P didn't look quite as bad on the daily, but here on the NASDAQ, we closed lower, taking out all these lows. It was a very bad close for tech stocks last week. And then if we look at the 60-minute chart, remember on the S&P, this wasn't quite bearish. Definitely bearish here on the NASDAQ. So downside targets, what's interesting is also we're losing upside targets on the chart. So that is also bearish, where these upside targets are starting to be negated. We've got this new 0.5% chart where the downside target, 16.5%, is now activated with last week's close. Lots of support lines here along here, but really that 16.5% is now hanging over us. And then if we look at the short-term chart, remember we said 6% downside. We've only got one target here. We had two on the S&P. We do still have this upside target, but again, close below that level that we saw in January. And this is the 60-minute chart, remember. Then 6 or 7% downside here as well. So pretty worrying. If you're trading the market really closely, take a look at your 1-minute point and figure charts. And then last of all, if we take a look at some of the European markets, FTSE up this morning, but pretty bearish here. We see downside targets and all the charts here, weekly, daily, 60-minute, all pretty bearish, and just heading down now. If we look at the Xetra DAX, the DAX chart looking pretty worrying. Now through on the weekly, that's been holding on longer than FTSE, but that is now turning bearish. DAX is down 13% so far this year, so that is really quite a big move down. US down about 8%, FTSE down about 6.5%, so really quite a bad start to the year so far. And here we see the DAX falling away as well. About 5% downside on this chart. Downside target here, and this long-term trend just been breached this morning, about 9% downside there. So DAX is really falling ahead of other markets. Downside targets here of 11 and 22%. So again, we're seeing that play through. The Nikkei, if we take a quick look at the Japanese market, holding on that weekly cloud, but really still bearish on the daily. 60-minute again, just trying to hold on, so not looking as bad as it has been. Of course, we have seen China. It's closed today for the new year, but it is worth just looking at where we closed last week. This is the all-important weekly cloud here for China, and we're just holding on at the moment. Hard to believe that this market is still bullish, but the fact that we've gone lower here is quite worrying for the market. And here we see downside target. This target we talked about last week, 40% downside. So that is really very worrying on the Chinese market. These downside targets met, and then another 40% downside target here as well. We are just teetering along the bottom. We'll hope to wait to see what markets open at this week before we can say where next, but it does look pretty bearish there for China. If we look at the Indian market, downside targets here as well. This short-term recovery just in place, but really starting to look pretty bearish all round. And the Australian market, we'll just take a quick look at the Aussie, and bearish on the weekly, bearish on the daily, 60-minute just holding up. Targets in either direction, but these downside targets, again, keep an eye on the 1-minute chart if you're following the Aussie. That's it for this week. Until next week, happy charting. See you then.